6 quiet years have passed since the last murder of John Wade, a janitor who was severely bullied to put on a clown mask, beginning a series of murders killing those involved in tormenting him, who would become better known as Pale Grin, a name given to him based on how the clown mask looked. Brian Pawlowski, a detective involved in investigating the murders and finally pinpointing John's hideout 6 years ago, is seen in the first act of the new story. Pawlowski is seen to be in a rough state, with unshaved shadow, eye bags, seemingly not having his life together, watching TV on his armchair as if troubled by the past events and failing to successfully capture and detain Wade, as his body was never found after being shot and assumed dead. Knowing he failed to capture him, appearing as if this troubles him to this day, he gets a call from the police department present on the scene by an officer called Stewart, informing him that John Wade is back, as they are present on a murder scene where the victim has been stabbed in a similar fashion to John's usual murders. Pawlowski, being a well-seasoned detective, having investigated John's case and knowing his methods way too well, has his doubts, being a skeptic that John would be stupid enough to be back. However, as Pawlowski sees himself as a failed detective not managing to apprehend John, he finds this to be his golden chance to prove to himself and others that he is not a failure, getting to his car and driving straight to the murder scene. Seeing Stewart present at the scene alongside another officer, enjoying a stereotypical donut, Brian has a quick chat with Stewart, expressing his doubts to why John would wait 6 years before coming out again, doing his usual murders, giving himself away, rather than adopting a new, more discreet way of killing people. As Pawlowski enters the apartment to investigate the scene, he notices how the murder weapon is a knife taken out of the knife set in the victim's kitchen, being identical to how John would take out his victims. He would typically use a weapon from the scene to murder his victims. This makes the likelihood of actual John Wade being back very slim, as he wouldn't be making the mistake of committing murder using the same method to expose himself. He would surely adopt a new way to lose track of himself. As Pawlowski examines the victim, he notices that there was a clear struggle between the victim and the killer, which is completely unlike John, as he was very skilled in taking out his victims, being sneaky and quick, not letting any room for failure or mistake. The identical method and way of murder makes Pawlowski believe that they have a copycat who is following the story of John Wade, trying to mimic his methods and series of murder. Using his black light, Brian notices the killer was injured himself, finding the remains of a bloody handprint which was poorly wiped and cleaned, making Brian almost sure it's an amateur wannabe copycat. This brings Act 1 to an end, with it being called The Good, surrounding Pawlowski's story and how he is the one who plays the role of the hero, trying to put an end to the ruthless murders. The second act begins labeled as The Bad, showing an unfazed character who is watching news in a remote cabin, being his hideout. This person is indeed the new killer who listens carefully to the news and the outcome of his crimes, being called the monster of Happyhills, the Pale Grin who committed a series of murders and disturbed an otherwise peaceful and quiet town. This seems to trigger this person who promises to show them a real monster, making a vow to punish Pawlowski, uniting him with the trail of the corpses that he wants to leave behind. That's when this person puts on his clown mask, being identical to John Wade's Pale Grin mask, yet in this game being a lot more detailed. He drives to a place and leaves his tow truck behind. He enters an arcade where he plays a game called Slasher, which has adopted the persona of John Wade Pale Grin, where he stabs criminals. This shows the attitude of the public on how they already have moved on from the murders which shook their town not long ago, being 6 years later now, with people being comfortable to even have a game made of him in public arcades. This is of course a little too quick, but in this universe, this doesn't seem to be the case. The killer proceeds to explore the arcade, finding a sledgehammer in the storage room, which he takes in order to use as a murder weapon. That's when he approaches an employee in the arcade and brutally murders him with the hammer, which clarifies that this person is not in fact John Wade, as John Wade's motive was driven from revenge, punishing those who made him suffer in school, the ones who bullied him and made his life a living hell. This copycat killer, on the other hand, seems to be a psychotic individual killing random strangers for the thrill of it. The employee at the arcade saw him coming, even complimenting his costume, showing how he doesn't know him. Also, the real John Wade would be much more sneaky and covert, sneak killing his victims rather than openly showing himself to them before killing them. A brutal and psychotic way of wanting to stare into his victims' eyes before taking their lives away. This corresponds with what Kowalski examined in the crime scene, that the killer was amateur and there was a struggle with the victim before managing to kill her, depicting how he shows himself to his victims before killing them. As on the other hand, John would be sneaky, not letting any struggle take place, not leaving behind such a messy scene. The act comes to an end with the new act being called The Ugly. In here, we learn about a new playable character being the father of Madison Carpenter from the last game, a girl who was the only nice person to John during his work at school, who was killed in vain by accident. A crazed and deluded John throws a baseball bat at her to stop her from running, which leads to her falling down and dying. Her kindness was taken against her as John developed some sort of an obsession with her and wanted to go to her and form some sort of a relationship, which was in its own right kind of inappropriate as John was much older than her, as Madison was only a teenager at that point. The father, Carpenter, loads his shotgun, making a vow to himself and his deceased daughter and wife that he will avenge her death, a death of a daughter which left him without anything, making him soulless. In his mission, he promises to punish and kill John Wade, who is reported on the news to be back, further promising to kill anyone who stands in his way. That's when he goes to the Happyhills harbor, encountering a group of bad guys who seem to be doing some illegal activity or trade. Carpenter, not fearing for his life anymore, saying he has nothing to lose, moves into the compound, killing goons one after another. These people also bear arms and have weapons, depicting how whatever is happening here is not legal and something bad, which makes it clear Carpenter is an anti-hero, someone who is there to do unconventional good. That's when Carpenter gets to the boss of the operation, being one of the bullies at school, who alongside Kyle tormented John. Interrogating and threatening him, he confesses that Kyle owns a nightclub in downtown known as the Violent Lotus, someone who would know about John Wade and potentially his whereabouts, explaining he doesn't know anything else. That's when Carpenter thanks the bully, saying how he will save the trouble for John, pulling the trigger and shooting him dead. This new take on the story depicts how three main characters will be playable now. The beloved, intelligent and sharp detective, who is older and looks for redemption, Detective Kowalski. A seeming copycat of John Wade, wearing the scary pale grin mask and raining terror on anyone he comes across to, killing for the thrill of it. And finally, a heartbroken and vengeful father who lost his daughter in a brutal fashion to John Wade. An innocent daughter, unlike John's other victims, who even showed kindness to him, which has now made the father a brutal killer, which has driven him to the edge, being a brutal adversary now, ready to do anything and kill anyone in his way to get to John Wade and punish him for what he did to his daughter and the irreversible pain he bestowed upon him, making him a broken man, but a very dangerous man left with nothing to lose. This is a very exciting sequel that I'm really looking forward to play to find out the aftermath of failing to apprehend the notorious John Wade, Happyhill's ruthless killer, and how Kowalski feels now for 6 years. A psychotic copycat who kills for the thrill and why he copies John Wade, and finally a broken and angry father whose daughter's death took his soul and humanity away, only driven by vengeance now. Thank you folks for being here. It's been your host Star, and until the next video, have a fantastic day.